Today we now go on to talk about the resurrection, and we use this passage from Luke 24, the one you heard read not long ago, about the three women that went to the tomb. This is the last of a series of sermons that I have preached on who is Jesus to you. We've talked about Jesus being the anointed one, the one that you love with all of your life and on whom you pour all of your life because you love what Jesus stood for. And then we talked about Jesus being the humble king, the one who bowed down to the power of God and understood that only God has power in this world. Nobody else does. And if we follow Jesus, that's how we live our life, knowing that all things belong to God and all things depend on God. And then, on Friday of this last week, we gathered here to remember the death on the cross, called Good Friday. Good Friday because the cross brought goodness into this world. And we celebrated what it's like to follow the crucified one into the life of self-giving, self-serving life. Now today we want to talk about the risen one. Do you know Jesus as the risen one? The scriptures proclaim that that's who he is. And so I want to focus upon one verse here, and you probably know what verse it is I want to focus upon. That's what the angel said to the three women who brought their ointments to the tomb to prepare Jesus for his death. These angels said to the women, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen." Wow. Amazing thing to say to them. And they were totally confused. They were totally mystified. They had no idea why the angels would say such a thing. They had no idea why that kind of a statement would come to them from heaven. Why did they think that? Why were they so confused? Well, in the day of Jesus, the Jewish faith did not really understand nor appreciate the idea of an eternal life. They understood what was called Sheol, the land of the dead below. And as they understood that, they believed every dead went to that land to sleep there until the day of the general resurrection, when all the dead would rise, and they would be judged according to what they had done or what they had not done. That was kind of the Jewish faith at the time of Jesus. And for the angels to say, he's not dead, they couldn't understand that. How come he could not be dead? Because he's supposed to be in Sheol. He's supposed to be sleeping. He's supposed to be with all the dead because he's died. That's what the women understood. How could the angels say that he is not dead, that he is alive, that he has risen? They did not understand that because it did not make sense to their current world view that there could be such a thing as someone who has risen from the dead and become what is called a life-giving spirit. They could not grasp that. So they ran back to the disciples to see if the apostles could grasp it. And they couldn't grasp it either. They all ran back down, or some of them ran back down to the tomb, looked in to see what was going on. And as it says in the story, they couldn't understand it. They went away mystified. How can he not be here? Because it's obvious his body is gone. Gone, not anywhere to be found. We don't know what happened to his body. All dead people have a body, and he's not here anymore. What happened? They can't understand it. They can't grasp it. What is the angel talking about when he says he is risen? Can't understand that. Just can't get it across. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to think. And you know, it's been a mystery for many people for 2,000 years. What really happened in the tomb? What does it really mean that Jesus is risen from the dead? What happened there? Oftentimes people answer that question with a word that we call resuscitation. He was resuscitated from the dead. Been dead, now he's not dead. But that's not the word that we use. We use the word resurrection, which is quite different than resuscitation. Resurrection is being transformed. It's being raised up from a state of death to a state of life. Different life. different kind of life. A life that doesn't depend upon a body anymore. A life that doesn't depend upon the flesh anymore. A life that now depends only upon the Spirit of God. So what they were encountering on that first Easter is what we are being asked to encounter in our lives as well. And that is to encounter the living Spirit of Christ. To feel it, to know it, to love it. That's what this day is all about. But I always like to find illustrations, because it's easy to say that, but I've tried to find an illustration recently in my life that would describe what it is like to encounter a living Spirit. Well, we went to Europe this last October, my wife and I, on a trip, and I got to do one of the things I had always wanted to do. I got to go to Normandy to see where the D-Day invasion took place. It's a sadness these days. A while back I was asking some young people, what was the D-Day invasion? And they thought it was a video game. It was not a video game. It was one of the most bloodiest, horrible invasions that ever took place. One of the largest military invasions that had ever taken place. And on that day, over 4,000 Allied soldiers lost their lives in less than 24 hours. To go to the beaches where that took place, to see those beaches, and imagine what it might have been like to be a 22-year-old, because that was the average age of those soldiers who went across that beach. To be a 22-year-old and have to jump out of that pontoon boat into the water and onto the beach, facing massive machine gun fire, massive cannon fire, barbed wire, hidden mines. It was the greatest death trap you could ever go into. But these young men and women, 22 years old, sacrificed their life to get across that beach. And as you stand on the beach, you can see that it was longer than a football field. Longer than that, you had to cross that with all that fire coming down upon you. And when you got across it, it was a tall cliff that you had to climb up with all that gunpowder and fire coming down. It is amazing if you stand there and look at it, that this actually took place, that people actually did that, and that 4,000 of those soldiers died that day. An amazing, amazing place to go. But the most amazing place there was not just the beach. It was the American cemetery. Some of you have been there and seen it, others of you have seen pictures of it. The American cemetery is built upon a cliff high above the ocean. And that's where they have buried the remains, not only of those that died on D-Day, but of those that died in World War II. There's 9,000 monuments, all of them the same, all of them white, all of them spread across this beautiful, green, deep, beautiful place with all of these trees behind it. And as you stand there, you look out, and there's the ocean down below. And it's a place of peace. It's a place of honor. It's a place of respect for these people who gave their lives. And as you stand there, if you go in the afternoon, they begin to lower the flag and they start to play taps. That was a very moving experience for me, to see the sacrifice, to feel the pain and the anguish these people must have suffered, and to know that they made that sacrifice willingly. To stand there and feel it. You could begin to feel the spirit for which they died. As I walked among the tombstones and looked at the names, a thought occurred to me. These people are not here. They've risen. They've risen because of the sacrifice they made. And they have risen because they lived and died for freedom. Freedom. And I began to feel that spirit of freedom come into me. And I began to understand this is what it's like to have an encounter with a living spirit. You could feel it there. It blows in the breeze. And you begin to think about this world. And you begin to realize that every time you have the right to vote, every time you have the right to disagree with your government, every time you have the right to live as you would like to live, you owe it to those people. and you feel that Spirit come upon you. And you want to stand up for freedom wherever you can as well. I share this example with you for one reason. It's the only human example I can think of right now to describe what it is like to feel the Spirit of Christ on a much grander scale than that. Much grander than just freedom. Christ sacrificed himself for love. He died for love, unconditional love, self-sacrificing love, self-giving love. Christ died that the world might never forget and never turn away from that idea, that value, that Spirit. And when you see the sacrifice of the cross and you see it anywhere in this world, I hope you will begin to feel that same Spirit, the Spirit that Christ became, the Spirit of the living Lord, the Spirit that rose up from the dead and now lives among us, the Spirit of love. That's what this world needs. Love, unconditional love that accepts, love that is patient, love that is kind. This is what our world needs, and this is what Christ died for. And when Christ was raised from the dead, he was raised into that Spirit, and that Spirit is what can fill our hearts today. So how do I know this? How do I know that that Spirit is here? Because I personally have felt it, and also I see it. You know, there's a lot of things you can look at in this world. You can look at all the bad stuff, and you can get all anxious about it, and you get all angry about it. But there is some good stuff. Every time I see somebody sacrifice a little bit of himself for another person, Jesus lives. I know he lives. And every time I see some people who are angry with each other and who hate one another and who can't get along, all of a sudden decide that it's better to love each other than to hate each other and start working together on a common project, I see that and I know my Redeemer lives. You see, it's all over this world. We just don't pay attention to it. We're too interested in our wood life. We want to live that wood life and be all important and look good and all that. But the real life is the flame. The real life is the love. And every time you see that love being given, being taken, oh, it is wonderful. Just the other day, I saw it right here at ICC. We have this man, Vicente, poor, wretched man, doesn't even have good, clean clothes, but he comes every Wednesday to clean the weeds off of our patio. And one of our members saw how he was sweating, and they took a cold glass of water to him. Somebody that doesn't matter to anybody. That's Christ again. You see, this is what the world needs. We need to realize we belong to each other. We need to realize that we have to help one another. We need to realize that that's what this Spirit of Christ is all about. And when we say he is risen, what we say is that death cannot destroy that Spirit. There's a lot of evil in this world. There's a lot of people trying to kill people, hurt people, do all kinds of things. And it's bad. I don't say it's good. I say it's bad. But what I do say to you is that love conquers. And it will conquer. And it always has conquered. Because love is what God is, and it is what we need in this world today. So when we say he is risen, what we are really saying is that love has won the battle. That love has won the war. And that love cannot be defeated. And that love can live in your hearts. And it can live in my heart. And it can live in everybody's heart. That love is alive. And it is here. And it is with us. A point I'd like to make about Christianity that I feel is a very important point. Other world religions, which are fine religions in many ways, but they don't understand the power of the Spirit of the resurrected Christ. Mohammed has a temple where you can go and see his remains. Buddha has ashes scattered all over where people can go and bow down to them. But Christ has no place in this world except your heart. That's the only place he can live. And that's what he does. He lives in your heart. And he can guide you and inspire you to do all kinds of love that he wants done. So the first thing I want to make clear today is that He is risen means that love has risen from the grave and it now lives in us, and the world needs to know about that great power. He's risen. But there's a second thought here, and this is probably even more important to us as Christians. It's the first part of the question that the angels asked. Why are you seeking the living among the dead? Very powerful question that we really need to think upon. You see, if the women who went to the tomb that day would have paid attention to Jesus, if they would have listened to what He taught, they wouldn't have gathered up their ointments and gone down to the tomb. He already told them He wasn't going to be there. He already told them He was going to raise from the dead. Why did they go to the tomb to put ointment on the dead body? Why did they do that? They thought that's what you should do. You need to honor your dead. Everybody believes that. You need to honor your dead. Of course, that's what they thought. And so they went to honor the dead Jesus. And guess what? He wasn't there. Wasn't there at all. I've told a little bit of this story before, but I'll tell the rest of it now. When I was 15 years old, all my friends were getting summer jobs, and that means they had some money so they could go play with their friends and have money. But I didn't have no money because I didn't have no job. So I told my dad, I said, I want a job. I need a job, you know. And at first he didn't like that idea, but he said, well, okay, I see you're looking out for your future. Let me think about what kind of job you can have, you know. And I said, okay, I'll go with that. And we were a member of the church, First Methodist Church there in Irving. And my father had these two good friends. They were twin brothers, and they were known as the O'Connors. And I guess they were pretty fine people to my father. They owned the largest funeral home in Irving, Texas at that time. And so my father came home all excited and said, son, I've got a job for you. And he says, listen, the O'Connors are looking for a summer intern. And I thought, boy, I bet the line for that job is pretty long. But my father encouraged me. He said, you know, this funeral home business is really good business, and if you're thinking about your future, maybe you should learn about it and get into it. He says, they always make good money, and they never run out of clients. And I said to myself, well, I guess that's true. I'll tell you the truth. It was an awesome experience for a 15-year-old to see what I saw. Dead bodies, embalming. Got to see what it was like when people get really, really old and die. It was a mind-opening experience to see just how fragile and how precious life was. And actually, now that I look back, I am so glad I had that experience, because it taught me a lot about how short and brief life is, and what the fact of the matter is that we all end up dead somewhere. And so I learned a lot, I did a lot, and I saw a lot. And I thought it was an okay job, because they paid about twice what they paid at the kind of McDonald's place where all my other friends worked. And I was content, but then the last week before I was to leave, the last week of my summer internship, I was sweeping up the floor, and the door was open to the offices where the two O'Connor brothers were talking. And I couldn't help but hear what they were saying as I was sweeping the floor. And they were talking to each other about some wonderful new products that had come online. One of those was a concrete vault. And people could choose to pay extra money, of course, to have their loved one buried in a concrete vault. And get this, so as to protect their dead loved one from the cold. Now, I wasn't but 15 years old, but I kind of wondered about that. And that made me kind of feel curious. I thought these men were in this business because they wanted to comfort people that were crying, and they wanted to help people that had died and lost ones. I was really thinking they were tender-hearted people, but now they're talking about making money off of a concrete vault to keep people from the cold that are as cold as they could be already. And then they started talking about another new product that came in. It was called a granite sealer, and they could charge people $50 a year to go out and seal the tombstone against the weather. I was very disappointed, actually, as a 15-year-old full of righteousness, I guess. I said to myself, these men are not really nice men. And I was trying to finish up and take my broom and get out of there because I decided I probably would never come back. And I heard them say something that has stayed with me till this day. One of them said to the other, says, "Brother, isn't it great that people love the dead more than the living?" Oh, wow. I said, wow, that's something to learn. And I got to studying it over the years, and I have become convinced that the human race does tend to love the dead more than they love the living. Why would we do such a thing as that? Such an insane thing, it seems like. Why would we love the dead? Well, as I've studied it and thought about it, it appears to me that there's a good selfish reason for doing that. Yeah. A dead person cannot argue with you. A dead person cannot hurt you. And a dead person can't cause you any trouble. We like it when the people we have known are no more because they no longer give us the problems and the troubles and the difficulties we need. And then we purify the image we have of them, and we think of them, oh, as our poor loved one, and oh, how much we cherish them, and oh, how much we love them. But when they were living, well, we might have said a few things we ought not to have said. So you see, this is something that I think is very important for us to understand, because there's a real danger here in our Christian life. And the real danger is that we will end up loving a dead Jesus instead of walking with a living Jesus. Amen. You see? Now you can argue with a dead Jesus. He's not going to give you any trouble. Oh, Jesus, I don't need to do that today. Oh, I don't need to like that person anymore. Oh, he's never going to give you any trouble at all if he's a dead Jesus. But you can't argue with a living Jesus. You can never do that. Oh, and you can't get down the road of life with a dead Jesus. You got to figure it all out by yourself. And you got to make all these mistakes and all these things you ought not to do. You can't go down the road of life with a dead Jesus, but you sure can with a living Jesus. And you can rest in peace with a dead Jesus. You can say, oh, I'm blessed. I'm just resting in peace. So nice. But you can't do that with a living Jesus, because he will always give you some trouble to work on. Somebody that needs loving. Somebody that needs help. Some part of the world that needs to be saved. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we going to the tomb like these women? Are we going down there to worship a dead Jesus? Or do we worship a living Jesus who walks with us and talks with us and guides us and shows us what we shall do and calls us to the commitment of crucifixion on a daily basis for the good of others? Is that the Jesus you walk with? A living, a risen Jesus? Or is it the dead Jesus in the tomb? So to summarize today, these are the two things we need to ask ourselves about the risen Christ. The first one is, do you feel the Spirit? Or is your heart on fire for love? Have you heard the good news that love is possible, that you can become used of God for love? Have you heard that good news? Have you seen and understood what it means that Christ is risen? Do you know that? Or do you say, oh, that's a nice story, happy Easter, and what's for lunch? Got to think about these questions. And secondly, do you worship a dead Jesus, or do you worship a living Jesus? Are you content thinking that you've got everything under control? Jesus is under control. My life is under control. Everything is nice and good because everything's dead. That's why it's all nice and good. Or are you living with that living Jesus who says, you need to change some of these things. You need to go to some of these places. You need to do some of these things. It's a choice you have to either live with a dead Jesus or with a living Jesus. And so therefore,
Sorry about that. Put it way over here.
it's a new phone. I have not learned how to turn it off. Well, anyway, I was making my points, and they are good points, and you can still remember them. And that is, who do you worship and who do you live with? Living Jesus, dead Jesus, and the Spirit that is Jesus. So therefore, we need to think about that, and we need to understand that. These four sermons that I have preached now have attempted to help you to understand who the living Jesus is. Is He the anointed one in your life, the one that you love and pour all of your life into? Is that who Jesus is? Or do you keep the perfume of your life on your counter and say, I'm not going to waste that? Is Jesus your humble King who has taught you how to walk humble with God, how to live in humility with God, how to understand you got no power, you've got no hope, you got no reason to do anything except as God guides you and God leads you and God gives you the blessing? Is that the God Jesus you know? Or is it the Jesus that blesses you and gives you everything you want and makes you feel good and feel nice? Is Jesus your humble King? And is He the crucified one in your life? This is what you also must ask. Is He the crucified one that causes you to live the crucified life? The life that dies for others, one little bit at a time, giving yourself up for those who suffer in this world? Or do you say, well, you know, that's their trouble. I've got Jesus and I don't care. Let me tell you, that's never going to work. And then the final thing is the thing we looked at here today. Is Jesus your risen one? The one who lives. The one who lives in your heart. The one who guides you, directs you, and causes you to be the new creature that you are? Or is Jesus some dead doctrine that you put in a tomb of apathy? What is it? Who is it? My prayer for you this Easter Sunday is that you will understand. That you will understand what you need to say. When the angels come to you in any circumstance and any situation and say to you, why are you looking for the living among the dead? I hope that every one of you can say clearly, not me. Not me. I'm not looking for the living among the dead. He is risen. Hallelujah. He is risen. Hallelujah. He is risen. Hallelujah. That's my prayer for you. Amen.